They stuffed a newborn into a sack, tied it shut, and left her alone on the cold, empty plains to die. The night was silent, until a cowboy riding home through the darkness heard something no man should ever hear. A faint voice, softer than the wind, whispering one word, "Mama." What he found when he tore open that sack would shatter his soul and change his life forever. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the jagged horizon, painting the western sky in hues of burning orange and fading purple. A lonely wind swept across the dry plains, carrying with it the whisper of coyotes and the faint rustle of brittle grass. The land felt empty, abandoned, until one faint, trembling sound rose above the silence. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This story begins with cruelty, with a choice made by those who should have known better. Deep in the wilderness, far from the safety of town, a crude sack lay discarded near a cluster of rocks. Inside it, struggling for breath, was a baby. No blanket, no comfort, no protection from the biting cold of the night. Just a helpless child abandoned by the very people who should have held her closest. No one was supposed to find her. No one was supposed to hear her. That sack was meant to be her grave, but fate doesn't always follow the cruelty of men. Miles away, a cowboy named Elijah Cole was riding home from a long, weary day on the range. He wasn't the kind of man who sought attention. He kept to himself, worked hard, and spoke little. People in town knew him as quiet, maybe even cold, but he carried a heart that had seen too much loss to show itself easily. That evening, Elijah was cutting across the rocky flats, his horse's hooves striking, sparks against stone. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in the memories of a wife he had buried too soon, and the child they had both prayed for but never had. He thought he had left those dreams behind, locked away with the past. But then, he heard it. At first, it was just a faint sound carried by the wind, a noise so soft he almost thought it was his mind playing tricks. He slowed his horse, cocked his head, and listened again. The prairie was usually filled with distant howls and cries, but this sound was different. It was weak, trembling, almost human. Elijah dismounted, his boots crunching against gravel as he walked toward the direction of the sound. His hand instinctively rested on the handle of his revolver in case it was trouble waiting in the dark. Step by step, the sound grew clearer, breaking through the night air, and then he froze. From the shadows of the rocks came the unmistakable sound of a baby's cry. His heart lurched. For a long, stunned moment, Elijah just stood there, unable to believe what his ears were telling him. He pushed aside brush and stone until his boot struck something rough, an old burlap sack. It moved. He dropped to his knees and tore it open. Inside lay a baby girl, her tiny fists trembling in the cold, her face pale with exhaustion. Her eyes barely opened as if she had no strength left to fight. Elijah's throat tightened. He had seen death in many forms, but nothing compared to the cruelty of what lay before him. He reached down with trembling hands and lifted her out. She was lighter than he expected, fragile like a bird fallen too soon from its nest. He cradled her, close, shielding her from the night air. Her breathing was faint, her lips dry. And then it happened. As Elijah held her, thinking she might slip away in his arms, the baby's lips parted. With the last bit of strength in her tiny body, she whispered a single word. "Mama." Elijah staggered, his breath caught in his chest. That one word struck him like lightning. It wasn't just a sound. It was a plea, a desperate cry from a soul too small to understand the cruelty of the world. His eyes burned, his chest tightened. He hadn't wept in years, but in that moment he felt something inside him break. "Mama," she whispered again, weaker this time. Elijah pressed her against his chest, his voice trembling. "No, little one. You're not alone now. Not while I'm here." He quickly stripped off his coat and wrapped it tightly around her tiny body. The night air was sharp, and if he didn't act fast, she wouldn't survive the cold. He mounted, his horse with the baby cradled against him, riding hard through the fading twilight. His mind raced, questions burning like fire. Who could do this? Why leave a child to die? But above all, one thought overpowered the rest. She said, "Mama." That word echoed in his soul, louder than the pounding hooves beneath him. He couldn't shake it, couldn't ignore it. He had found abandoned animals, wounded men, even bodies left to rot on the trail. But never something like this. Never a baby clinging to life with only one word on her lips. The ride back to his ranch felt endless. Every bump of the trail, every gust of cold wind, made Elijah fear he might lose her before he could reach safety. He spoke to her softly, his voice rough but filled with urgency. "Stay with me, little one. Don't give up now. You're stronger than this. Just hold on." When at last his ranch house came into view, he didn't slow his horse. He rode straight to the porch, leapt down, and carried the baby inside. His hands shook as he lit a lamp, casting light over her pale face. She was fading fast. He laid her on a blanket by the fire, rushing to warm milk, though his supplies were meager. His mind screamed at him. He wasn't prepared for this, didn't know the first thing about saving a newborn. But as he pressed the bottle to her lips and saw her tiny mouth latch on, hope flickered in his chest. She drank slowly, weakly. Each swallow was a victory. Elijah's breath came heavy with relief. He brushed the strands of damp hair from her forehead, whispering again, "You're safe now, little one. No one's going to leave you again. Not while I breathe." But even as he spoke, his mind churned. Whoever had left her in that sack, whoever had abandoned her to die, was still out there. And Elijah Cole knew one thing with burning certainty. He would find out who and why. For now, though, all that mattered was the fragile life wrapped in his arms, a baby who had been left for dead. A baby who had called for her mother. A baby who had found, against all odds, a cowboy who heard her cry. And as the firelight flickered across the walls of his lonely ranch house, Elijah knew this was only the beginning. The fire crackled low, throwing shadows across the wooden walls of Elijah's cabin. The baby stirred softly, wrapped snug in his old coat, her tiny breaths rising and falling like fragile whispers of life. Elijah sat close, his hand resting protectively near her. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, but he dared not close them. He knew too well how thin the line was between life and death. For hours, he stayed by her side, feeding her what little milk he had, whispering gentle words he didn't know he remembered how to say. Each faint sound she made was a reminder of how close he had come to finding nothing but silence inside that sack. Every time her lips parted as if searching for the word again, "Mama." His chest tightened with a mixture of grief and determination. By dawn, she had regained a little color in her cheeks. Elijah felt a flicker of relief, though his mind was restless. Who could abandon her? Why in such a cruel manner? These questions gnawed at him like wolves circling in the night. He knew one thing. Whoever had left her wanted her gone, and if they discovered she had survived, they might come looking. When the sun climbed over the horizon, Elijah saddled his horse once more. He wrapped the baby in a blanket and tucked her close against him. He had to ride into town. There was no midwife living nearby, and the child needed more care than he alone could give. As he entered the dusty streets of Clearwater, heads turned. Cowboys leaned against hitching posts, mothers paused their shopping, and children stopped their play. It wasn't Elijah's presence that caught their eye. He was a familiar, if distant, figure. It was the bundle he carried so tightly in his arms. Whispers stirred quickly. "Is that a baby? Where'd Cole get a child?" Don't look. Like his... Elijah ignored them. He pushed through the doors of the small apothecary, startling the shopkeeper, a thin man with spectacles sliding down his nose. "I need milk," Elijah said gruffly. "And anything for a baby." The man blinked in surprise, peering at the infant. "That yours?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "No questions, just what I asked." The apothecary stammered but obeyed, gathering what he could. When Elijah left the shop, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes following him. He knew the town would not let this mystery rest. By midday, he had found the local midwife, a stern woman named Martha. She examined the child with practiced hands, clicking her tongue. "Thin, weak, but she's got fight in her. She'll live if you keep her warm and fed." Her eyes narrowed at Elijah. "Where'd she come from?" Elijah hesitated, then said, simply, "Found her." Martha frowned. "Found her?" "In a sack," Elijah replied, his voice low and edged with steel. "Out by the rocks." The woman's face paled. She crossed herself and shook her head. "Lord help us. Whoever could do such a thing?" She looked up at him sharply. "You'd best be careful, Elijah. Someone who abandons a baby to die, they won't take kindly to her being found." Her warning echoed in his mind long after he left. Back at the ranch, Elijah cared for the baby, with a patience he didn't know he still had. Each day she grew stronger. Her cries grew louder, her little fists less frail, and each time she whispered that word, "Mama," it carved deeper into his heart, but rumors spread fast. Within a week, townsfolk began visiting Elijah's ranch under the guise of neighborly concern. He saw the suspicion in their eyes, the questions unspoken. Some wondered aloud if the child was his own, born of some secret affair. Others whispered darker things, that maybe she was abandoned because she carried shame, or worse, sin. Elijah ignored the talk, but he couldn't ignore the growing sense that someone among them knew the truth. One night, as the baby slept by the fire, Elijah sat on the porch, staring out into the endless dark. His hand rested near his rifle. Coyotes howled in the distance, but it wasn't them he feared. It was men. Men who could leave a child to die without remorse. Men who might come to silence the one who had lived. And then, his fear proved true. He heard the creak of a saddle. In the distance, the faint jingle of spurs. Someone was approaching under the cover of night. Elijah rose slowly, his eyes narrowing as a shadow appeared near the fence line. "Who's there?" he called, his voice like thunder in the stillness. The shadow froze, then turned and rode off into the darkness without a word. Elijah's gut tightened. This was no curious neighbor. Someone had been watching. Someone who did not want that baby alive. The next morning, Elijah rode back to the place where he had found the sack. He searched the ground, his eyes trained like a hunter's. And then, he found it. Tracks. Boot prints in the dust, heavier than his own. A man had been there. Not one, but two. He followed them as far as he could, but they vanished into the riverbed. Still, it was enough to confirm what he already knew. The child hadn't been lost by chance. She had been abandoned with purpose. When he returned home, he found Martha waiting at his door. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "Elijah," she said, "someone's been asking questions in town. Rough men, strangers, they want to know if you've got a baby here." Elijah's blood turned cold. Martha's voice shook. "You can't keep her safe alone. They'll come, Elijah. You need to decide what you'll do." Elijah looked past her to where the baby lay sleeping peacefully inside his cabin. Her tiny hand curled into a fist, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of new life. For a moment, all he heard was her faint voice echoing in his memory. "Mama!" His jaw set like stone. He had already made his decision. "I'll protect her," he said quietly, but with a fire that Martha had never heard in his voice. "Whoever left her to die, they'll have to come through me first." The midwife's eyes widened, but she said no more. She simply nodded and left, leaving Elijah alone once more. That night, as he rocked the baby in his arms, Elijah understood something he hadn't before. This child wasn't just a burden of fate dropped into his life. She was a second chance, at love, at purpose, at redemption. And he would not fail her. But the storm was gathering. The men who had abandoned her were closing in, and Elijah Cole knew, before long, blood would be spilled on the dry earth of Clearwater. The night came heavy and silent, the kind of silence that warned of danger lurking beyond the horizon. Elijah sat inside his cabin, the baby swaddled in his arms, her soft breath the only comfort in the tense stillness. He had kept his rifle close, his ears sharp. He knew they would come, and they did. Near midnight, the sound of hooves broke the quiet. Shadows moved against the moonlight, 3 riders approaching with grim purpose. Elijah laid the baby gently in her crib by the fire, kissed her small forehead, and whispered, "Stay safe, little one." Then he stepped outside. The riders halted, at his fence line. Their leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, leaned forward in his saddle. His voice was sharp as a blade. "We heard you've got something that doesn't belong to you." Elijah's stance was unyielding. "If you mean the child? She doesn't belong to anyone who'd leave her to die?" The man sneered. "That baby was never meant to live. Hand her over, and we'll forget this ever happened." Elijah's jaw clenched. "You left her in a sack. You thought the plains would swallow her cries. But I heard her. I'll not hand her back to men who call her life a mistake." The scarred man dismounted, his boots crunching the dirt. "You don't understand. That child's birth brought shame. Her mother wanted her gone, and her kin agreed. She's a curse, Cole. She'll bring ruin to anyone who keeps her." Elijah's voice rose like thunder. "The only curse is a heart that can abandon innocence. She's not a mistake. She's a miracle." The standoff hung thick in the air. The men reached for their guns, but Elijah was faster. His rifle roared in the night, the sound echoing across the empty plains. Chaos erupted. The scarred man fell, his pistol clattering against the dirt. The others, startled and shaken, spurred their horses and vanished into the darkness, unwilling to face a man who would die before surrendering a child. Breathing hard, Elijah lowered his rifle. His eyes flicked to the cabin. Inside, the baby had stirred, her small voice breaking through the smoke of violence. "Mama!" Elijah stepped inside, sinking to his knees by her crib. His hands shook as he gathered her close, his chest heaving, with both fury and relief. The firelight flickered over his weathered face as tears finally spilled down. He whispered, his voice breaking, "You'll never be alone again. Not while I live. If you need a mama, then I'll be your papa, and I'll protect you with everything I've got." The baby nestled against his chest, her tiny hand clutching the fabric of his shirt. For the first time in years, Elijah felt something bloom in his hollow heart. A reason to keep going, a reason to fight, a reason to love again. Outside, the prairie winds howled, carrying away the darkness. Inside, the fire burned warm, and a fragile life slept safely in the arms of a cowboy who had heard her cry. She had been abandoned to die, but because one man listened, she lived. And in that single word, Mama, a broken soul was made whole again. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every story we tell is about hope, pain, and the strength to carry on, and there are many more to come. So make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next journey. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for keeping these stories alive.